All right, welcome here to Asian 120 Japanese Cultures. For the rest of this semester, we're going to learning hopefully quite a bit, I think, about Japan, about Japanese culture and history and peoples and stories and all sorts of things. We got a lot of elements and aspects and features of Japan to discuss. Um, hopefully you're a interested in Japan and b want to learn more about it because if so, you are in the right place. And I'm glad you are here. I like Japan a lot. I've been there quite a few times. My wife is Japanese, and so I go and visit their family, and we try to travel around as much as we can when we're there. So seen a lot. I also have a little background in Buddhism, which is very important in Japan, and I also like religion and I study a little bit of Shintoism as well. And so I'm here to kind of share what I know about Japanese culture. And if I learn anything new along the way, I'll share it with you as well. Just kind of right off the bat here, everyone hopefully is familiar. This is Mount Fuji, the Fujisan. This is kind of, the very prominent feature of Japan. This is taken from this very famous park, our shrine, the Arakura Fuji Sengen Jinja Shrine in Fuji Yoshida. I think it's about an hour west of Tokyo. And you can kind of see this is autumn, but during the cherry blossom season, there's all these great views of of Mount Fuji. And as we'll learn here in Japan, nature is very important. Natural elements, seasons, all of those. And we'll expand on why that is as we go along in this class. So that's welcome to the course. I'm glad you're here. The first thing I want to do before we even get into anything about Japanese culture is I want to talk about what is culture. What does that mean? And then after we'll discuss Japanese culture, I think one of the best ways to look at culture is through food. So then we'll talk a little bit about Japanese food as well. But let's kind of think about if this taking a class on Japanese culture. Before we jump in there, I think we should think about what is culture in general. I mean, you put yourself in in somebody from Japan's shoes. What if they were taking a class in American culture? Like, what kind of things would they be taught, right? And so I do want to kind of think about it, kind of expand on that a little bit, because culture is a little bit hard to define. And in fact, I given a discussion post there that I challenge you just to kind of try to think about how would you define this term. I already gave a response there where I talk about, I really think culture, one of the elements of culture is they're shared. Whatever these features of culture, whatever they may be, and they're unique to all different societies, they're shared. And I also think culture is instructive, right? It kind of teaches people how to live, how to be, how to relate. But the interesting thing with each culture, I think, is that they all have their different symbols, their different signs that people can relate to. What is trying to come up with it, but it's difficult, but I think it's nice to try to, in your own words, how would you define culture, right? In this module here down below, please do. What would you think about culture? And if there's one thing to think about just as we're going, what's the difference between culture and society? Which again is another big question, right? Does society dictate cultures? Do cultures make up societies? What's the interplay between them, right? Are the societies the people, right? And cultures the things that inform the people, right? So all sorts of things. I mean, but it's an interesting topic to think your way through, because a lot of times people throw these terms around: culture this, cultural diversity, or social norms, right? But sometimes it's important to kind of think a little bit deeper. What actually do those mean? Particularly if you're taking a class called Japanese culture, because some of these things I want you to learn about Japanese cultures, but also the nice thing about culture is you can also compare those. Okay, how do they do that in that world, and why do they do that there versus how do other cultures approach different situations there? Here's a little culture wheel of different features of cultures: communities, stories, language, traditions, rituals, techniques, objects, arts, foods, drinks, all of these things, values, right? So again, I think one of the main important points of culture is that they're shared, right? You can't have a culture of one. Right? They need to be shared amongst people. So these traditions, these beliefs, these customs, right? But then you got to think, and this is kind of what this class will look at a little bit, is where do these traditions, beliefs, and customs come from? How do they originate? How are they perpetuated over time? How have they changed, right? In times, because that's the other thing about culture is there is in culture there's always a tension between what's staying the same and what's changing over time, and why are they changing? Is that good, right? And what are things of cultures being lost over time? So, which actually in Japan is somewhat of an issue. It's so much history, so much culture, so many arts that some of these things are not getting in there, and we'll see that as we go into this course of things that maybe are falling away, that need protected, need preserved, right? So these customs, beliefs, traditions. Their ways of life are cultural, are very cultural. Food, which is what we'll look at a little bit today, I think is because that's where you can really see culture. Food, doesn't always change. And it does and it doesn't, right? But it really talks about, and particularly in Japan, food is very culturally unique, and we'll see why that is. Obviously, music is a way of culture. Art, literature, folk tales are great, and we'll look at those a little bit in this class too. And what do these folk tales tell us about the world? Because a lot of sort of social norms and behaviors are embedded in these stories that are then told. A lot of those, right? Why they're fun is because they're good for kids, and when you hear a folk tale as a kid, right? You're like, oh, that's so fun, all these different characters. But then when you hear them as an adult, you're like, oh yeah, that's that lesson. That's what they were trying to tell us about in there. I mean, which you knew it, but you didn't really, really always know. And we'll look at some folk tales in this class as well. Obviously, language is also very embedded within culture. How you say things, how you communicate, the way you talk. Particularly in Japanese language, we won't talk too much linguistic stuff here, but one thing is, there's different elements. The way you talk to different people is very different. There's a whole different sort of way you talk to your elders versus your friends versus the way you talk in business versus the way you talk in maybe at a coffee shop. And they're all in the way, and those embedded within the language, much more so than English. English doesn't really have those distinctions. And then family relationships, I think, are very important in culture because this is where, family relationships really perpetuate culture. And what you learn from your elders and what you pass down to the next generation is very important, particularly in Japan. That elder, the ancestors, and what you learn it is very important. There's sort of this respect for previous generations, and also within family relationships, which is another aspect of culture, is place and space. Right, where you're from, and you can go big to little. I mean, Japan, there's definitely the place of Japan itself, but then different regions of Japan have different sort of cultures as well, which we'll talk about when we get into geography and various worlds. And so places and spaces, and within Japan, a lot of places have significant importance, like Mount Fuji, if you will, which will hopefully by the end of this class you'll learn a lot more. You'll be more familiar with a lot of places and spaces of Japan, right? And again, just before we get into Japan, just some of these things about, right? If somebody would ask you, what is American culture? Right? What does that mean? Right? And again, I just kind of like put up some pictures here that I think, or somewhat, if somebody said, tell me about what is American culture, right? I mean, well, you have this distinction, like some people might say American culture is this hustle and bustle of these cities, right? New York City, Los Angeles, right? And consumerism and businesses and McDonald's and all of these things, right? Right? Or maybe somebody say, oh, no, America, like it's built rural, right? There's a country farming part of American culture. And both are true, right? Or the summer barbecue, right? Which again, food is important. Bringing people together, right? Is I think it typifies American culture, right? I think people come to America, they want to go to a barbecue, they want to hang out, have a hot dog in the summer, right? But if somebody similarly, right? If somebody asks you what's Hawaiian culture, right? There's people would answer that in all different ways as well. Obviously, the ocean is very much part of that. So again, space and place, food, kalos is very important. Farming, music is very much part of Hawaiian culture as well. Language, for sure. Olelo is very much part of Hawaiian culture. So, be thinking about that as you approach Japanese culture. What are points of that you could play with? Or, you can even burrow down even closer. What is, Hilo, right? It's its own culture, but it's embedded within Hawaii, but within America as well. Right, but kind of the rainy Hilo days is very much part of this culture. The Merry Monarch Festival, right, a celebration of Hawaiianness and Kalakaua and all of those embedded in there. Ken's House of Pancakes, right, is very much part of that. So you kind of see how these elements of culture play out. So again, ask yourself, it's a complex topic. And then around the world, right? If you were to study other places other than just Japan, right? World cultures, British tea, right? If you went to Britain, everyone stops in England and has tea. Or India and Hinduism, kind of religion and culture is very much embedded within India, very specific, unique to India. And Japan has that too, with Shintoism and Buddhism. Arts, Russian ballet is very much part of the Russian culture, an expression of their culture, the ballet world, and arts and literature as well. Brazil, part of the culture there. Again, is soccer and how that plays into their world. And, American has sports. A lot of culture has there. India has cricket and various things. Japan, baseball is a very important sport, or sumo, which we'll look at as well. And then China, part of culture is history as well. China and Japan have a lot of connections, historical connections. There's the Great Wall there. Japan has even a greater wall, this whole ocean that surrounds these islands. So that's something to just kind of be thinking about. What are these features of culture? And when we go through Japan, be thinking about that. Okay, well, what is this? How does this tell us about Japanese culture? And how does that compare and contrast with cultures that we know or are a little more familiar with?